Now we've already looked at a simple if statement, so we can create this quite easily. And we can go through and say that Ms. Jones is the manager for accounts that are less than 4. If I just cancel this for a moment. There it is. Okay, for the manager for all accounts less than 4 months in arrears, and Mr. Smith is the manager for all other accounts. So how do I know that it's in arrears or not? This cell. And for less than 4 months, there we go. And then it's Ms. Jones. Otherwise, it's Mr. Smith. Easy. And it tells me for this one, it's Ms. Jones. Yes, that's true. So that's great. But what happens on this one where I've got different actions? So if the month in arrears is 0, so if it's not in arrears at all, nothing happens. But if it's 1 to 3 months, you get sent a letter saying, I'm sorry, you still owe us money, when are you going to pay? But 4 months or more, it becomes a priority and people start knocking on doors. So what we need to do is we need to have 3. And how many options do we have in an if statement? We only have 2. So let's take a look at this. Now we've got our basic syntax here of if the test is true, you get that. If it's false, it's that. We can manipulate this and do what's called nesting functions. Now I've created a whole section within this course on nesting functions because you can do so much more than what I'm going to show you. So I've got my if here, and what I can do is I can say if, and I'm going to call this test number 1. If test number 1 is true, great, it stops here. The computer, Excel, does not even look at the false. And there's a way I can show you that or prove that to you. So I'll show you that in a few minutes. But I've got my first test, my first test and my first true. But if it's false, then that means the test is false, that it's not true. It only looks in the false position when it is false. So I can put another if in there, kind of like saying, but if. So if blah, blah, blah is true, then but if test 2, and then I've got my true number 2. I'm going to have to go to the next line here, and then I've got my false way at the end. And then I've got a bracket to close here, and then another bracket for the first one here. So they're embedded in together. And in this case, instead of having 2 options of my true and my false, I've got 3. I've got 2 trues and a false. And so we can look at the first one. Sorry about that. If we look at the first example of the bank balance, which off the top of my head I'm going to say it was C4, I could be wrong, is equal to 0. Now if it's equal to 0, then it's not applicable. Yeah? And it doesn't matter. It just stops at not applicable. Only if it's not 0 do we want it to look at the next one. So we go if, open bracket, and we say then, okay, C4 could be less than, I think the next one was 4. Okay, and then if that is true, then it's a letter. And otherwise, if it's neither of those 2, it's priority. Some of you might be going, but 0 is less than 4. Yeah, 0 is less than 4, but this, C4 is equal to 0, is before it. And if this is true, it stops here and it ignores everything else. Only if this is false does it then jump over here and look at that. So you have to look at this quite logically and decide which one is going to be first. Okay, let's take a look at this in Excel. So in Excel here, we've got our function if open brackets. So action, oh, and I was right, C4 is equal to 0, then that is non-applicable. And then I'm in my false, and I have to make sure I have that comma. Otherwise, I'm not in my false, and computer goes, "Ooh, not quite sure what you're talking about." Then I can put my next if and open it up, and notice I have a whole set of arguments again. And I say that that cell is now less than, and I could do less than or equals to 3, or just less than 4. It depends on your data, whether you're dealing with whole numbers or decimals. Then I put my comma in, and I say that's a letter. And then I can put a comma in, because if it's not an NA, if it's not letter, it can only be a priority. So when all else, priority, oops, priority, there we go. When all else fails, and what am I missing? Quotations. If I don't have my quotation marks, computer says I can't do this. And then I close. Now watch this. When I do the first one, notice it's gone bold. And when I do the second one, the first one goes bold. So I know how many brackets I need to close. Press enter, and it comes up. There we go. Just going to copy that down. Now I was going to tell you, or I said before that I was going to show you how I know that it ignores the false if it's true. And I can do that simply by getting rid of the quotation marks. Remember when I don't put the quotation marks in from the previous video that it puts a hash name error message, right? So if I just do that, no error message. Yet, only in those that it should be Mr. Smith has it come up with my error saying, whoa, 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 wait a second, I don't understand what you're talking about. So that means for all of these, it looks at this, the test, and it says, yep, that's true. And it stops here, and it basically ignores that. It says, well, I don't need to know it. Don't need to look at it. Only if it's false does it actually go in there and go, right, I need to look at that now. Oh, wait, there's an error. And that's how this works. So if it's 0, then it stops here and it ignores everything else. But only if this is false does it actually look at all of this. Okay? Now you can have quite a number of ifs nested together. In this course, that's all we're going to show you is the nesting of the ifs. On the level 3 course, there is a lookup, and the lookups are for when you have a few more that you don't want to do an if statement. You can create a lookup for it. So that's something else to think about once you've got the if statements down. So let's try this again. I'm going to go to this next one of end of term. Now in the end of term, I've got 3. A pass, fail, or a resit. So maybe somebody was sick that day because the test was so easy, everybody would get 1. And I'm just going to hide all this stuff here so I just see what I need. So I've got my results and I've got the status. Now I'm going to do this one using my insert function because, as I've said before, memory is like a sieve and I can forget even the 3 arguments. So I like having my little, what I call the wizard, my function arguments with me. Okay, so I've got this one here, 45 or less. Well, what is a 45? The result. So if the result is 45 or less, over 45, or it's a reset. Now, which one of these should I do first? Should I do the 45 or less? Well, that's fine, because if that's true, then it could be over 45. But is a 0 less than 45 or less? Yeah, so I can't do this top one before I do this one down here if I'm going to use the 45 or less. So I'm going to start with that one. So if it's a 0, then it's a reset. Then I have to make sure I click on my value if false. Make sure your cursor's flashing in there. And then what I need to do is I need to add a second if. And I'm going to go to this function drop down here, and I don't even have to click on it because it says if. I just click once in it, and it puts in, see, it puts in my comma and my if, and it has my brackets already, and I get a new little functions argument. My wizard changes. So now I can look at the next one that's still the same cell, but this time I am going to do the 45 or less. And that's going to be a fail. And then if it's not a if it's not a fail, it's not a reset, it has to be a pass. Okay, and then I click on OK, and I can copy down. Notice I've got a blank here. Blank cells are zeros, so because 0 is nothing. Okay, and the great thing about this is if one of these got them wrong, and I put a new mark in, it automatically reevaluates. If this guy reset it and got 80%, was really sick that day, so the teacher said, of course you can, and they pass it with an 80, then it updates their status. So that's another bonus for using an if statement, constantly reevaluating. Now in this, once you download the functions if statements file, you'll find that some of the tabs at the bottom are red, and those are the ones that have nested ifs. So if you want to look at those and have some practice, try those out and see how it goes.